Hello, this is Mr. Galley from GCSE English Revision Pod with a quick message for you. If you want even more English Revision Pod in your ears, you can now subscribe to our premium service, GCSE English Revision Pod Plus, where for the price of just over £2 a month, on top of all the amazing free episodes which will continue to be free and there for you to use, you can also get a selection of amazing bonus episodes on things like Macbeth, A Christmas Carol, Romeo and Juliet, and all your favourite topics covered in the depth and detail that you are used to. If you are interested in getting even more GCSE English Revision Pod, all you've got to do is click the link at the top of this episode description where you can subscribe to GCSE English Revision Pod Plus. Hello and welcome to GCSE English Revision Pod. We are very sad to say that we are not sitting in Mr. Forster's car as we have been so many times when we have recorded this podcast before. Instead, Mr. Forster, we're sitting in completely different parts of the country.
I'm sat in a room all alone.
Yeah, and you can hear from the kind of echoey quality of
I know,
Mr.
my voice now
Forster's
sounds tinny. I find it very unfair that you're the recording, so I'm the one that sounds like I'm a robot.
I know, but I'm the one with all the machines, see, so this is my privilege. I get to have a bassier sounding voice than you.
Well, what are we going to do today then?
So, first of all, we should say welcome back to our listeners. We, like them, have had a lovely little time off over the summer holidays. We are now going to return and be getting these podcasts out to you as frequently as we can. We thought coming back in we would start with, we got an awful lot of requests for this last year and didn't quite manage to get it done, but we thought we'd start with love and relationships.
Yeah, on the AQA.
The AQA poetry cluster, love and relationships. Yeah, absolutely, because we covered, if you go back in our podcast feed, you'll see we've covered all of the power and conflict poems, some of them a couple of times over, but we didn't get around to love and relationships, so we thought we'd start that now.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about love and relationships, we're not doing it this week, but it's got a poem that's even worse than certain poems that we won't talk about in power and conflict. Tissue.
That's something for everyone to look forward to. And so we're going to start, a few things I should say just in case you're joining the podcast for the first time. What we do is every episode we will walk you through a question from a GCSE style paper. We will also upload a handout onto the description of this podcast episode, where if you click on it, it will take you directly to the handout, which you can then download. If you do that, you can then follow along with what we're saying as we are analysing the text. If
you're on Spotify, you might have to paste it into a browser.
I think that's all right now. I think it now works. Yeah.
Excellent.
It's the kind of high level technical skill that I'm bringing to this operation is I can now copy and paste links into Spotify.
Very nice.
Yeah. So yeah, we're all good. So whatever your podcast provider is, click on the link, get the handout, and you will be able to follow along with all the stuff we are saying as we are saying it.
Excellent. Well, should we kick off with the question then?
Yeah, go on. Why don't you, seeing as you've, as usual, you've done the lion's share of the work for this, so why don't you tell us what the question is?
Well, I thought a really good place to start with love and relationships would be by looking at this year's question.
Yeah, the one that actually came up this summer.
Yeah.
In the AQA exam.
So in the AQA exam this summer, the question was, compare how poets present romantic feelings in Winter Swans and in one other poem from Love and Relationships. Okay,
nice. Not poems that I was massively familiar with before this. What do you think about them?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love the poem that I've chosen to go with Winter Swans, which we'll come to in a moment. Okay. One of my favourite poets. Mm-hmm. And Owen Shears is good as well. So I think the first thing to note about this question is there should have been no surprises this summer. Romantic feelings, the theme is love and relationships. If you didn't revise that, well, yeah.
Yeah, so, kind of clearly links to the theme of the cluster in general, certainly.
Yeah, and so as always, the first thing you do when you get into the exam hall, or when you're doing any practice essay, is you have to start by setting up what AQA call a conceptualised argument, an overall thread of what is your opinion about what these writers are saying about the theme in the question.
So that would be, rather than just throwing down a selection of things that you happen to know or remember, that's the idea that you start off with with a kind of overall argument that you want to run through your entire essay?
Yes. So I thought our comparative thesis could begin something like this. Winter Swans by Owen Shears, first published in a collection entitled Skirrid Hill, and Thomas Hardy's Neutral Tones from his 1898 Wessex poems are initially comparable as they both draw upon natural imagery to explore the difficult times in a relationship, the times when the romantic feelings of a couple seem to have decayed and broken down. However, whilst Neutral Tones is unambiguously pessimistic, in Winter Swans, Shears suggests the possibility of a reconciliation between the distant lovers.
Good. I like that comparative thesis, or a simple term for it would be an introduction, of course, because I think while there's a lot of quite complex vocabulary in there, what you've done is inherently quite simple. You've set out that they both do this thing where relationships are compared to nature. That's your link between the two poems, but then straight away you draw on how they do that in a different way, and how that then how you end up feeling different.
One's optimistic.
Absolutely, how there's a different kind of tone in both poems, even though they do things in similar ways.
And that, whatever the question, is always generally for these comparative essays quite a good way to structure your thesis and indeed your whole essay. Yeah. What's the point of similarity? What's the point of difference?
Absolutely. And then straight away, if I'm reading this as the examiner, I'm thinking, if we go back to that word conceptualised, straight away you're thinking, right, this student has got a clear point here. They know how the poems are together. This is why they've put them together, but they also know where those differences are.
Yeah, and I'd like to actually draw students' attention now to the examiner's report, which we've included on our handout today, because there's a few of my pet hates that actually the AQA have now confirmed that I was right all along, which is always good for my ego.
I was going to say, I can imagine you sort of stroking your chin as you read that and thinking,
I was just kind of cackling. Like
once again, I've been proved right in the world.
Yeah. So I've highlighted them in yellow for people who don't want to read the whole thing, a few little things. So
just to be completely clear, sorry to jump in. So essentially the first box on the handout is not the essay that we're doing particularly here. This is some top tips from last year's examiner's report. These are some ideas from...
Yeah, tips from the chief examiner, which is always someone to listen to.
Good. All right, yeah, take us through them.
So the chief examiner has said that some examples of effective selection of second poems are neutral tones, which is the one we've selected today.
Yep.
It's mentioned a few others, but a few things to note is it said the responses that focused on the idea of romantic love and what that might mean, where this shaped and built their essay, were the best ones. So what they said they didn't like is students who simply followed a rigid, here's the language in both poems, here's the form and structure in both poems, which I know unfortunately some teachers do still suggest.
Mm-hmm.
And AQ have explicitly said they don't want that. They want argument-based response where you look at the theme and you have an argument about the theme, and that's at the centre of your thesis and your essay.
So the argument should come first, and then the analysis. Think of the argument as the kind of tree trunk of your essay, and then the analysis of the branches and the leaves. You know, you're using the analysis to support the bigger argument that you have about these two poems.
Yeah, and I certainly think there is a place for that quite rigid language form structure approach that some teachers go through, but I think that's more aimed at students who are trying to get that grade 4.
Okay.
And for all of you who with perhaps higher aspirations of trying to get towards those 7s, 8s and 9s, I think it can be limiting.
Okay.
So that's my first piece of advice, and the examiners backed me up, so thank you, examiners. So we're looking today at Winter Swans by Owen Shears and Thomas Hardy's Neutral Tones. And as we said in our thesis at the start of this episode, we're comparing how they draw upon natural imagery to explore the breakdown in a relationship, but then we're contrasting how Hardy's poem is pessimistic, whereas Shears suggests that actually romantic feelings can be rekindled.
Cool.
That's happy with that?
I'm very happy with that. I'm happy with the idea that romance can be rekindled as well. It's nice. It's nice.
It gives hope to us all.
Yeah, exactly. You know, even if you, I mean, I'm not saying we're romantically involved, but even when you find yourselves in different sides of the country, you can still make a podcast happen. I mean, do you think that was what Thomas Hardy was getting at, or no?
I feel we should write a poem about it.
Perhaps
anyway,
so, yeah.
Before we start, a few bits of key context. You do not need much context in your essay, so that's the first thing I'll say. The main reason I've included this is it can help you understand a little bit more about these poems. So this is included right at the bottom of your handout before we look at our main thrust of the argument.
Okay, so if I'm a student now, I'm scrolling right the way down the handout to the point where it says key context AO3, yes?
Yeah. So Winter Swans was published in Owen Shears's poetry collection called Skirrid Hill. And this is a really interesting title because Skirrid comes from the Welsh Ysgrid, meaning divorce or separation. Mm-hmm. So this is a collection of poetry that is about the breakdown in relationships.
Ah, I see.
And that word itself comes from the name of a mountain in Wales, Ysgrid 4, which lies on the border between England and Wales.
So
there's this idea of two faces facing different directions of nature, as a symbol of a breakdown in a relationship.
So the mountain is almost a physical manifestation of the separation between two things.
Yes, it's a lovely way of putting it.
Thank you.
And the previous poem in the collection as well, that's worth knowing, is called Valentine, and it explores an argument between two lovers and an uneasy reconciliation, where they're described lying together in bed as if they are wrecked voyagers, implying that their relationship is not so much love as kind of survivalist codependence, as if they're afraid of leaving each other rather than wanting to stay together.
Clinging on to each other so as not to drown. So those who had read the whole anthology, they would not be surprised to find that Shears was facing relationship problems at this point in time.
Yeah, it was certainly the speaker in the poem. I wouldn't necessarily... Got to be careful with those autobiographical associations, but certainly this is a poetry collection that is about the breakdown and the difficulties in a relationship.
Okay.
So likewise, Neutral Tones by Thomas Hardy. You could get a grade 9 without knowing this, but I love Thomas Hardy, so I'm going to tell you about it. Deal with it. It's my podcast and yours.
You've shown your true colours.
He wrote this in 1867, but it was only published in 1898. So it's unclear actually about which breakdown in relationship, if it was autobiographical, he's talking about. However, throughout his life, Hardy's treatment of women was pretty terrible actually, and his relationships were fraught with conflict. He married a woman named Emma Gifford, and although they were initially happy, by the time he published this poem, she had actually become so alienated from him that she had become a recluse, spending much of her time in the attic rooms away from her husband.
Oh, no.
So there's certainly autobiographical resonances there from this poem of the breakdown in relationship, when this is something that Hardy was going through at this point in his life.
Right, okay, so that was that section that we've just gone through. Again, I'm mindful of people who are maybe coming to the podcast for the first time. There we've given you your kind of AO3, so the contextual ideas around the poems that would have perhaps helped shape your argument and your analysis.
But an important thing to state, that was not your essay, because you do not want to start with context. Context should be something that is added onto your analysis.
Yes.
And it should always be relevant to the question. So let's kick off with our argument. Our first paragraph.
Excellent. So I'm now scrolling back to the top of the second page of our handout, where you can see in bold Mr. Forster's topic sentence.
Yeah, we always start with the topic sentence, which for those who've not listened before, is where we set up our overall argument for that paragraph or that section.
And so I think Go on, sorry.
You say.
I think it's easy to... you can't really overstate how important a good topic sentence is, even though they're only one sentence, and even though you're very, very keen to sort of get into your analysis, having a good topic sentence is so, so important.
Yeah, it's the spine of your essay.
Yeah, and actually writing them out in your plan before you start anything else, I think, can be very, very valuable.
Yeah, and a great revision trick is to actually not necessarily write whole essays, but write topic sentences and bullet-pointed analysis.
Agreed.
So the topic sentence we've gone for here is, both poems begin with an evocation of a bleak landscape, which is seemingly symbolic of the breakdown in the romantic feelings of a couple.
A bleak landscape. Nice. So straight away you're introducing the idea that the way that nature is presented as this kind of hopeless, broken down imagery, the sort of lost nature of the natural landscape, that's actually representing the way the couple are feeling about each other. Yeah,
and evocation's word simply is a fancy way of saying they describe.
Yeah, nice.
So, in Winter Swans, let's start with that because that's the one in the question. Mm-hmm. A few things that you could look at. You could look at the use of the pathetic fallacy to align the desolate landscape in which the two lovers walk with this emotional rift between them that makes them walk silent and apart. So I've put this in your handout that Shears writes about 2 days of rain. Mm-hmm. He writes about the waterlogged earth that's gulping for breath. And this dreary description, the personification of the earth gulping for breath, seems to onomatopoeically depict both the squelch of walking in wed mun, but also the sense of a breathless argument or the way in which you gulp for breath when you're trying to suppress tears.
Or perhaps if you were to go even darker, something gulping for breath as it dies, something fighting for those last few breaths.
That their relationship is drowning somehow.
Yeah.
So this is a great point to bring in some of that AO3 we just talked about, just briefly, in half a sentence perhaps. But this continues that linear narrative of the previous poem in the collection, Valentine, with that cynicism of that metaphor of them as wrecked voyagers. Mm-hmm. This is clearly a poem about a breakdown in romantic feelings.
Right, yeah, certainly. You can see how that all links together.
And I think this is a lovely way to then link into neutral tones.
Okay, so it's still in the first paragraph, but now moving into the second poem, right?
Yeah, because I think there's a lovely point of comparison here, which is that in Hardy's poem, we see the dark and decaying winter's day by the pond, which functions symbolically to represent the end of the speaker's relationship. And we see similar imagery. The sun's white, and the very title, neutral tones, which could imply the could faded, blanched colours of winter. A world where colour and everything's gone away.
Yeah. The brightness of the summer seems almost sort of unimaginable, and even the things which were once bright, like the sun itself, are now part of this bleached world where everything's been washed out of it.
Yeah, because the landscape describes as if it's chidden of God, so as if it's blamed. This is literally a God-forsaken landscape.
Right.
And again, he repeats the same conceit in the final stanza, where he describes your face with comparing it to the God-cursed sun.
Might be worth just quickly talking about that word conceit, because it's a lovely one if you can use it. Would I be right in saying that a conceit is the sort of extended image that runs through a poem?
Yeah, it's another way of saying extended metaphor.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a collection of different words to explain to describe the same things.
Right. Yeah.
So I think likewise we also see personification in Hardy's poem. We see the description of the starving sod. That again, just like the way in which is Shears's description of the sound of them walking, sounding like gulping for breath, seem to evoke the idea of them drowning.
Yeah.
The idea of the land starving suggests how this. We're looking at the barren months of winter, and unlike the fecundity of summer, life seems wasting away. Their relationship, the romantic feelings are withering and dying.
So to sort of bring all of that together, what we're essentially saying is that in both cases, the misery of the relationship seems to be spilling out of the couple and into the dying, desolate landscape around them.
Yeah. There's perhaps a difference, though, that we should now at this point state, which is that whilst Hardy here becomes actually more explicit than Shears, who only hints at the discord by suggesting that they were silent and apart. Because Hardy's speaker actually says in the second person how his lover's eyes were on me as eyes that rove over tedious riddles of years ago.
Right.
This kind of, eyes are something in traditional love poetry that are so commonly associated with notions of love. It's a very traditional conceit, and yet here we see in this imperfect rhyme even of rove and love, this slight dissonance, this emotional distance. These are not eyes that symbolise their love, but eyes that are looking for tedious riddles. Because what's a riddle?
Well, it's something that's difficult to decipher, something that's difficult to work out and understand.
And in the early stages of a relationship, these kind of mysterious riddles are the things that intrigue us and excite us. But what's so bleak here is that these riddles are now tedious riddles, the suggestion that the pair have given up looking for any answers to those mysteries. That
they can't actually be bothered to understand each other.
Yeah, and so this is kind of mirroring that bleak and decaying landscape, the landscape where the sun has just faded away. Their love too seems to have faded away until they don't even care about the mysteries between the pair of them anymore.
And then I suppose that's quite a nice point to move into what would be the second paragraph the second main paragraph of OSA.
Yeah, I think that in this one you might actually want to split it up into two and do a paragraph on each of the two poems, because I think there's a few more things to unpack, but it'd be the second section of your essay, certainly.
Yeah.
And I think, so the main topic sentence here to look at would be, yet the ultimate difference between the two poems comes from the suggestion of optimism contained in the final stanza of Winter Swans, which contrasts with the bleak cynicism at the conclusion to Hardy's poem.
Right, okay, so we've moved on from the idea that they both use the landscape in very similar ways to show the breakdown of the relationship, and we're now talking about something that the poems actually do fairly differently.
Yeah, we're talking about the tone, as you said right at the beginning.
Yeah.
How actually, although both focus on the difficult times when romantic feelings seem to have been broken down, actually their endings are remarkably different.
Yeah.
So, I mean, looking at Winter Swans, this comes from that central extended metaphor of the swans contained in the title.
Okay.
Because there's a clear turning point in the third stanza, which comes through the enjambment with the previous stanza quite abruptly, with the arrival of the swans that stopped us with a show of tipping in unison.
So the couple are sort of the sight of the swans together. It's probably a contextual point that's worth noting is that swans mate for life. Is that right?
Yeah, as we're told in the poem, and in a moment, so it's clearly central to Shears's message. They're a symbol of fidelity, of romantic feelings which last.
Yeah.
And the idea of the appearance of the swans stopping the two lovers suggests they've stopped them both literally and figuratively, stopped them on their walk, but also perhaps stopped them from that introspective focus on their own relationship to think about what relationships are.
So you can imagine both the lovers sort of spiralling in their own heads, thinking sort of worse and worse thoughts about this relationship, and suddenly the arrival of these creatures that are sort of symbolic of romance and fidelity and these other things halts them in this really negative path they've fallen into.
Yeah, and looking specifically at the idea of them tipping in unison, the suggestion of which is juxtaposed with the way in which the couple walked apart, and the way in which the swans, when they come to the surface, are compared to boats righting in rough weather, seems to provide a model for the pair's reconciliation. I mean, I really like this simile of them writing like boats righting themselves, because it suggests that even amidst the storm of an argument or the storm of disagreement or anything, that we can come to the surface. We don't have to drown.
There's the ability to return, in contrast to the idea that things were dying earlier. There is here imagery which suggests that things, even in the worst of times, can come back.
Yeah, so for Shears, the natural world therefore gives him a model both for the breakdown of their relationship, but also crucially for their reconciliation. And we see this also in the way in which his partner points out that swans mate for life, and then that metaphor in the final lines of how their hands swum the distance between us and folded like a pair of wings settling after flight. They become transformed almost through this language into swans.
It's as if the swans have shown them the way.
Yeah, as if nature has provided this model to rekindle their relationship. That it's not words that have brought them back together, but something deeper, something more instinctual, something perhaps like the fidelity of swans. Perhaps
is there an argument that you can find whatever you're looking for in what surrounds you as well? So do you think that's reading too much into it, or the idea that they found in the natural world, they found both evidence of their relationship dying and evidence of their relationship still having a chance? Do you think that's the poet suggesting that you will ultimately find what you're looking for, and where you will, or do you think it's more?
Perhaps that, remember, the question is of course on romantic feelings. Perhaps that their feelings, their romantic feelings, or the loss of the romantic feelings, that seeing it in the landscape is more just a reflection of themselves. It's not in nature. It's something that they are seeing in nature.
That's interesting. So you then move on to neutral tones again?
Yeah, because this is very different from Hardy. Because Hardy, if you've read any Hardy, his writing is generally quite bleak, cynical, and pessimistic.
Not many
swans. We should not look for any kind of consolation.
Right.
And I think we see that here, even from the beginning of the poem. Even in the idea of it being an ash tree, is this suggestion of the ashes of a fire, and fire obviously being so commonly associated with romance, with passion, and the idea of their relationship being reduced to ashes, like the ash tree kind of suggests. Mm-hmm. There's also, I think, an interesting one that Dr. Oliver Turle points out, some really interesting analysis, that there's this pararhyme that transforms rings into wrongs.
Okay.
So a pararhyme is where it's a rhyme that doesn't quite work because the vowel changes. Mm-hmm. So ring and wrong obviously is the same word, except for the I is transformed into an O.
Okay.
And Dr. Oliver Turle suggests that this is appropriate not only because these two words actually have a shared etymology. They both the word wrong actually comes from the idea of something being wrung out and twisted. So that's where so the two words are actually connected in the history of their words. Obviously, that's one of my hobbies, finding that out. But it also,
I was going to say, listeners, if you're feeling a bit lost at this stage, don't worry. About 96% of us probably currently are, including me at this stage. But yeah, it's nice to have these. It's nice to have these bits in here.
Well, the only point I think that's worth mentioning here is that the idea of and rings with wrong have shaped to me your face. So keen lessons that love deceives and rings with wrong have shaped to me. The idea that their wrongs, the end of their relationship is being wrung out like a cloth that's damp, and the last vestiges of it being dripping out certainly is quite a disturbing image. Squeezing
every last drop of joy out of the cloth of their relationship. So is that the way you read it?
Yeah, and even the lover's smile is described as the deadest thing, alive enough to have strength to die.
Oh, that's a brilliant line, isn't it? Alive enough to have strength to die.
Yeah. So there's something morbid, something pessimistic that suggests that, love relationships are as ephemeral as human life, that love exists simply to die.
What do you read out of that idea that it's alive enough to have the strength to die? Is that saying that it won't just sort of drift into nothing, that it has to have some kind of horrible definitive death, that it has to summon up the last of its strength so that it can end sort of badly?
Yeah, it might be implying that romantic feelings, they don't just fizzle out to nothing. They do perhaps end with the pain of dying.
They have to have a death in the negative sense of the word, not coming to rest, but a death that's painful and nasty and all those other things.
Yeah, I think we also see perhaps an interesting point of comparison here, because Hardy uses the same imagery as she is, imagery of birds, and yet for Hardy this gives him not hope, but something that's ominous. The birds that he sees are not swans. Instead, it's birds of ill omen. That it's this bleak,
crows and vultures and those kind of
ominous
birds.
Bird a wing. Yeah, that presumably a crow or a raven, if we're thinking about our Macbeth associations here.
Ah, yes.
That human nature seems to find nothing in nature for Hardy other than this bleak and hopeless world.
So bringing it sort of all back together, then you've got two poems that both start off using the natural world to reflect how badly the relationships have gone, but then they go in completely different directions, because while Hardy continues to see imagery of death and bleakness and the idea that the relationship is doomed, slowly dying, by way of contrast, in Winter Swans, the natural world reminds them that there is something here that is worth fighting for, that can still be salvaged, like those ships in the storm.
Yeah, and that's a lovely kind of conclusion to have. And then perhaps just as a final comment, that this perhaps reflects the moment in which Hardy's publishing, when his marriage is breaking down, when his wife doesn't want to talk to him, is living as a recluse in the attic of their home until her death in 1912.
He's like, I'm going to write a poem about her instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a very, very interesting take on those two poems. So, there you go. Like I said, for new listeners, this is essentially the format of the podcast. We'll try and do them every week, won't we? It might be a bit more difficult with this new digital format, but we'll do our best to get them out weekly. And each time we're going to take you through a GCSE style question in the form that we've done today. I'm sure you would like to as well, Mr. Forster. We'd like to say a real thank you to all the people who got in touch with us on results day. We got so many emails and tweets and whatnot of people letting us know how they'd done in their exams. And it was really, really thoughtful and kind of people to let us know. We really appreciated that, didn't we?
Yeah, and also some really sweet reviews on iTunes. So thank you.
Yeah,
and that is why we do it. So it made us feel really good about it. So
exactly.
Really
I mean, the whole thing is a massive vanity project at the end of the day. So
of course,
anything that makes us feel good. But no, in all seriousness, that was great. Thank you to people for letting us know. You can, of course, get in contact by email. I hope you remember the email address because I don't. What is it?
EnglishRevisionPod@gmail.com.
Yes, and you can also follow us on Twitter at GRevisionPods, where we will always be posting any updates about new episodes and that kind of thing. If
you guys actually talked about doing something quite special, haven't you, with YouTube? Do you think you'll have time?
I'm going to try and convert one of our early podcasts into a YouTube video where I'm actually going to sort of match up the bits we're talking about to the handout and that kind of thing. So yeah, once I've done that, I'll put it out on Twitter, and if people can let me know whether that works for them or not, that would be fantastic. But yeah, I'll try and get that done this week.
Here's us at the cutting edge of mixed media.
Exactly. I've heard about this new thing called YouTube, which I think we can really use to our advantage. All right, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you very soon.